I open this public meeting of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Science. By giving you a votum. The votum is as follows: our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Before I ask the first opponent to speak and ask these questions, I'd like to ask the candidate to give us an overview of the research on which her thesis is based. The floor is yours.
Rector, tribunal members, and online audience. My name is Seema Girija, and it is with a great, deep sense of gratitude, honor, and privilege that I present to you my Ph.D. thesis entitled Making Lived Experiences Matter, Understanding the Journey of Mothers of Children with Autism in India. On 23rd March 2015, a 6-year-old non-verbal autistic child broke his arm during intervention. And my journey began by defending the right of the mother to be included in rehabilitation, which was dismissed. There were ample discussions and debates with both policymakers and practitioners. Not only was the mother considered as a barrier to the process of intervention, but our little group Together We Can was deemed as anti-professional. The outcome was disastrous, and I felt it was my duty to do something, and we had to change direction. And thus doing research in the real world became the other choice. Thus, my thesis, unlike others, did not begin by noticing an academic knowledge gap, but it began by noticing a gap in practice and policy. This explains my main research question: how can lived experiences of mothers of autistic children in India be understood and supported so as to enable sustainable long-term solutions? The aim of this thesis was to make the experiences of these mothers as evidence and be included in evidence-based practices. For this, I'm sorry, my presentation is stuck. For this, there was a need for the formulation of policy framework, and there was a need for formulation of framework, and because my research was complex, and the complexity came from the context and the concepts that was understudied. The context was that I was studying the entire journey of the mothers, and the concepts that were studied was vulnerability and agency. The framework used was ecological systems theory, which places the mother and the child as a single unit, which was an adaptation, which is then they do not live in a vacuum. They are influenced by the family, the professionals, the neighborhood, and the policymakers. So on these two accounts, there was another concept which was studied, is that each of these stakeholders can influence the mother and create vulnerability, like the picture shown. It can either suck in her energy and become the funnel and increasing vulnerability, or it can give her the voice to speak up for the rights of her child and produce agency in her. And this would be decided by what disability constructs each of these stakeholders, including the mother, subscribed to. For this, there was an elaborate, in-depth understanding of the lived experiences of mothers necessary. And in each phase, we had to identify the engagement of all actors. And hence, the main research question was divided into 5 sub-questions. The first was from childbirth to noticing the early signs. The second phase was from noticing the early signs to seeking help for getting an early diagnosis. The third phase was from getting the diagnosis, or the process of getting it, and moving towards early intervention. And the fourth phase was the education or the schooling years. The fifth study emerged alongside as Together We Can movement progressed, and there were certain factors that led to policy change in Kerala. Kerala, my state, I am proud of. It is a noteworthy state for multiple reasons. For the high human index development, literacy, and many other reasons. But most important, the context was the notable events where my understanding started in 2015 with the child breaking the arm. The exploratory study began in 2016, followed by a series of events as seen, and finally in 2020, the Kerala government formed guidelines for regulating and monitoring therapy centers, but then COVID happened, and which makes the summary and findings of this thesis more significant, because what was found in the first phase, that what contributed to the vulnerability of the mothers was that they were skeptical about the use of screens. Neither was there enough conclusive evidence in literature which said how much or how to use the screens and technology. But with COVID, when the thrust has moved to using the virtual medium, and we don't have an option of whether we use it or whether we don't, but we needed to know how we can use it. So this was seen in the thesis way before the pandemic, that when the mothers lacked support and when they were shuffled between myriad responsibilities soon after childbirth, whether they were having the first child or the second, and they didn't have the skills to navigate through those years, they tend to resort to support of screens, and we really lacked more knowledge. So what created vulnerability was this lack of knowledge and support, and what moved to agency was when there was support and they really knew how to use it. In the second phase, the key findings was that what contributed to vulnerability, from noticing differences to reaching an early diagnosis, was that a lot of mothers spoke about their intuition, knowing that something was amiss, and they did seek help. The agency was unfortunately blocked, where it was sidelined and shamed also, not by both the layers in the systems, which includes the family and the professionals, and this increased vulnerability. But on the other hand, what enhanced their agency was their knowledge about social emotional learning, effective screening tools with professionals who knew on how to identify autism early and to share the knowledge and skills with the mothers, and then their agency improved in this phase. In the third phase of getting the diagnosis, what created vulnerability was the suddenness in which the diagnosis was revealed to the mother. From dismissing all her concerns to suddenly letting her know that the child has autism, and which is a permanent condition with no known cause and no known cure, which created a lot of seclusion in her, not knowing how to move forward. And with all the myriad kinds of interventions, she did not know how to move forward. This created vulnerability during the early intervention phase. But what increased her agency in the same phase was when professionals and families slowed down and took it at her pace by including her in a solution-focused and a strength-based manner, and not with only focusing on the deficits or fixing the deficits, but also on working on the skills of the child. We saw agency. In the fourth phase, what increased, which is the phase of education, what increased her vulnerability was the segregation which was thrust upon her in the name of specialization and the lack of specialized services and resources available. So we see the mothers navigate through the schooling years seeking help but not receiving it, at the same time trying to make their own methods and mechanism to navigate this phase. But what increased her agency in this phase was the solidarity. When her knowledge was accepted and included in inclusive education and individualized education programs, and the system was willing to change to accommodate by knowing that the system too benefits in the process, and the focus was very specific to the skills of that child and the mother saw agency. In the last article, which is the journey of Together We Can, what we saw that led to policy change, where 3 mothers, when supported by the right group of people, were able to come together and voice and break the silence and voice for the rights of their child with the collective efforts of all stakeholders. And when everybody together stood up for her rights, it led to agency. To conclude, the end goal was to break the hierarchy of knowledge and to consider the lived experiences of mothers as valid knowledge and to be included in evidence-based practices so that we don't miss out on one part and we bridge this gap not only in practice but also in policy. So, and there had to be active knowledge sharing because and skill transfer also, because it is the mother's journey and they have to live with the child through their lives. And to change and to, while we need the medical model to reach a diagnosis as a goal, it should not be a barrier by focusing only on the deficits. Henceforth, if the focus shifts to a strength-based approach, it was more helpful. Inclusion had to be considered as a two-way process which benefits both, so that everybody is responsible for this change to ensure that every child matters, every mother matters, and every mother's lived experiences matter. My defense journey and the work continues to these 2 organizations which I'm part of. From filing a case in Kerala, we have expanded our scope, including more stakeholders, and as of yesterday, we have got a diary number in the Supreme Court of India where we are filing a public interest litigation. We have filed the public interest litigation to ask for more localized support and effective implementation of the RPD, which is the Rights for Persons with Disability Act. But none of this would have been possible, and I wouldn't be here if not for the collective efforts of key individuals in each of these organizations who came together to help me with knowledge, transferred skills, and supported me all through here. Thank you so much and most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. May I hear from the candidate if she is prepared to defend her thesis?
Rector, on your authority and as authorized by the College of Deans and in accordance with the Doctoral Examination Committee in the Faculty of Science, I am prepared to defend my thesis entitled Making Lived Experiences Matter, Understanding the Journey of Mothers of Children with Autism in India, in order to obtain the degree of Doctor of Philosophy.
Thank you. We go to the first opponent, Professor Henderson. He is professor and chair of psychiatry at the Boston University School of Medicine and Boston Medical Center, Boston, USA. We are very glad that you're here and the floor is yours.
Thank you. On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I first want to congratulate the candidate on a job well done. I really enjoyed reading the thesis and learned quite a bit. And also thank you for your excellent presentation. I'll start with just maybe 2 to 3 questions, depending on time. My first question is, Chapter 4 highlights that screening potentially resulted in a negative use of technology for the mothers and autistic children. If you were to do your studies today, given the pandemic and the shift towards the use of technology, and particularly in mental health care, would your results be different?
Dear learned opponent, thank you for the most relevant question, and which is something which even I am thinking of. Yes, I think what I would do differently is a more in-depth understanding of not about whether to use technology or not to, and how much to limit. And it is not about the what, but more shift focus on how can we use it. Because post-pandemic, it is not possible to say don't use, because we need to consider that it has become the support mechanism not only for education but for even entertainment and engagement, and we have to see it as a way forward, because that is the way forward. But hence there is all the more need to understand how can mothers use it. So my study would again be more in depth. It will have to be in phases where what we do for preschool children will have to be different, for children below 0 to 3 will have to be different, and it cannot be a blanket policy or practice for all children ages 0 to 18, but it will have to be discussed with active involvement of what are the mothers experiencing, what are the challenges she faces, because it is not just engaging with the child that she's facing after the pandemic. What she's also facing is increased household responsibilities, her own career, which is also online, one or more children, not necessarily with or without disability. So we can't see technology alone. We really need to understand more and in separate phases. So that would be how I would do it differently.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. My next question is, what are the logical next steps to better understand how to support mothers of autistic children in India? Is it research, policy, clinical interventions? Where do you go from here based on all the work that you've done?
Yeah, thank you for the question. From here, my background not being primarily research, and the reason I started the research was to bridge the gap in practice and policy. So I would answer this question in two parts. I would start with policy because that is what influences practice. So in the research, there are the 4 phases which we have studied, and I would like to use each of the findings of each study to different ministries is what the appeal is going, which is one is the health ministry. The next would be the education ministry for the chapter 4 findings, and then would be the social justice, which is across. So unless, and we also see that how unless there is collective action, we might not head forward, and that even in policy making, that the mothers or parent groups or parent forums, which are very active across India and not only in Kerala, be included in the policy making. That would be one part. The second part would be what has already happened is we started with a knee-jerk reaction when the child broke arm, and it just led to the case, though it was not a planned move. But now that we have the knowledge from the research after studying the journey of Together We Can, as in chapter 8, we have what I have learned is that there needs to be the selection of the community of practice matters, and we have widened our scope. It is not just with autism. Together We Can has widened scope to not only children but all persons with disabilities, and the focus is if there is effective implementation of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which was only as recent as 2016, and only in 2017 it has been actually rules have been framed in all the states, and in 2020 we filed an RTI to all the 36, that is states and union territories we had filed, and the message was that there is a lot of gap that needs to be done. So the prayer to the Supreme Court of India is to have established district level committees so that we localize the support, because we the mothers cannot be also considering the pandemic cannot be going each time to the court or to the state. It has to be more localized, which includes professionals, all stakeholders and parent bodies within the committee, and decide how the committee can function predominantly for quick redressal of complaints, and even if a toll-free number. That is what the work has already begun on those lines. Thank you.
Good, very good, thank you. And I think I have time for one last question. How would you make sense of your findings in the context of the whole family's experiences? Are there also valuable lessons that can be learned from the remaining family members, including fathers, siblings, grandparents, etc., If so, any implications for your interventions or policies?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. Here, I would say the focus would be more on practice rather than on policy. But again, the message would have to be given by the practitioners. The onus would be on the professionals to include the family from the beginning, where the knowledge needs to be shared to the mother and the father, ideally even before childbirth, specifically about social and emotional learning skill as the milestones. If we see the vaccination cards, the higher focus is on physical developmental milestones and sometimes even language development, but we don't see much about social and emotional milestone development. So that, yes, if it has to come in practice, if that needs a policy, yes, it will start from there. So and also for the gynecologist, from the gynecologist onwards, to include the father as well in the process, so that they understand what the mother goes through, what the changes in the body, and what to expect after childbirth. That will be part of the health department. Soon after, it will be for the pediatricians to know more and to be included in their knowledge base also, that they look out and ask the right questions to the mother. And in case of a constraint of time, which is likely in a country like India, have more transdisciplinary team when you're working with children 0 to 3 specifically, training the preschool teachers, and it will be their onus to help the family members so that they don't dismiss her concerns in the beginning, so that the grandparents are not dismissing when a mother is saying, I think something is amiss with the child. Believe her.
Sorry, I have to interrupt because of time. So thank you very much for this questioning. We have to think about the others. Thank you very much. We go on to the second opponent of this afternoon, Professor Ndeti. He is professor in psychiatry, he is director of the African Mental Health Foundation, University of Nairobi. We're very pleased that you're here. Floor is yours.
On the authority of the rector, and by virtue of my rights, I would like to ask you 4 brief questions which need brief answers. Number 1, what are the most significant findings of your study?
Okay. The significant findings towards academic, filling the gap in academic knowledge will be that vulnerability is usually seen as associated to groups, but in my study, what we found was that vulnerability is a construct which is created due to the lack of knowledge, skill, and support. And when agency is not blocked, then the mothers will act, or they will act. So when it is only when their agency is blocked that the vulnerability is created. So this would be the added finding to the academic literature. To the policymakers, the implication in policy and the key finding would be to include the mother's lived experiences, include the voices of the parents and the families in policy making, because if we intend to support them, their voices need to be heard. So that will be the main finding, and to break the hierarchy of knowledge. And to practitioners also would be the same across health education, that include the voices of the families and consider inclusion not as diluting evidence-based practice, but as strengthening evidence-based practice by bridging the knowledge gap. So these would be the key findings.
I think you have answered my second question, but let me ask it, and please 1 or 2 minutes to answer. Okay. What is unique about your study? Make it very brief.
What is unique about my study is that it studies the entire journey of the mothers and the lived experiences, and the journey is going through her lens through different phases. And this is unique because earlier studies, there have been plenty of studies, but it has been specific to maybe one part. And the second thing, that it has been an in-depth exploration, which also looks at what can professionals and policymakers do. And it is, I think, leading to more practical solutions and making what seemingly is simple as include the mother's knowledge as valid, but which needs to start with policy and practice. So that would be what I think is unique.
In fact, what do you consider to be the most significant innovation in your study?
The most, thank you for the question. The most significant innovation would be that the understanding that the mothers are the ones to be helped, or that, you know, this breaking the hierarchy of knowledge, skill and support, and the fact that the mothers being included in with policy and practice across different phases, that would be the innovation, because that is not existent now. So it has to start there, where inclusion is not seen as something that benefits only one group, and inclusion is seen as what benefits everybody. And that would be the complete paradigm shift that which is needed in the way we work with the entire rehabilitation system, including health, education, and social justice. Everywhere this paradigm shift has to come, that this knowledge is valid and we cannot dismiss it as unscientific or diluting evidence-based. It strengthens.
Okay, and finally, how can your study be scaled up beyond your study site? Bangalore, so I understand.
Kerala.
Kerala have been a beautiful place. And so how can your study be scaled up beyond your study site and to the rest of India and to other low and middle income countries like Kenya, where I am sitting?
Thank you so much for even giving me the thought that it can actually reach Kenya. Indeed honored to even hear that from you. As far as the scaling up the study, it has not the study, but the work has already been scaled up, wherein I did have participants, though the majority of the participants were from Kerala, I had participants from other states as well. And it was compared with a wide range of document, which includes predominantly what the mothers had written on social media and everywhere, where everybody was saying the same thing. So the scaling up wouldn't be a problem, because the work has already happened, and this seems to be the journey everywhere, no matter whether Kerala or Tamil Nadu. In fact, the scaling up has already happened in Tamil Nadu, where our guidelines, which came in Kerala, has already been reviewed, and they have identified the gaps, and the draft is ready. The final will be published soon. So one state is already taken from here, and with the Supreme Court PIL that we have filed, asking for district level committees, which is asking for district level committees in every state of the country. So that in itself would empower the voices of mothers in every district, and it will benefit even the professionals in every district, because they have more knowledge now, and there will be collective efforts. So that I would see as scaling up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. We go on to the third opponent this afternoon, Dr. Padmaker. She's a psychologist and deputy director of the Emergency Care and Recovery Center at the Benyon. We're very pleased that you're here. The floor is yours.
Mike.
On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, it was a pleasure reading your thesis, Seema, and I really appreciate the sensitivity with which the thesis has been written. And I have two questions for you. One is, you being a practitioner, can you please specify the strength-based intervention for mothers who have children with autism spectrum disorder? This has been discussed in the last parts of the discussion of your thesis. Yes, can you explain further?
Thank you, learned opponent, for the compliments. Yes, I think as a practitioner, this work has already begun. And by strength-based, what we mean is that if there is a deficit, there is also, it has two sides. It has two sides. So if you cannot do something, then what is it that you can do, or how is it that you can aid to what you cannot do? So the focus is on how and not on what. That is where it would start with strength-based, and also to by including the lived experiences, which are the life skills or activities which are creating a barrier for the mother or the child to grow. It is only those which we need to really work on through intervention to help the child. But if we follow the lead of the child, which the mother is already doing in the home setting, so gain more knowledge from her. Like, for example, in the thesis, in the inclusive education chapter, which is chapter 7, we have seen that it is the mothers who have developed an alternate way of teaching. So there won't be a one specific strength-based model for all children. The whole idea is that it will be very individualized for each child. There are mothers who have used stims which need not be curbed, because they can be channelized, and that has created activities where the children are benefiting. So if we look at the child as only being diverse and not to fit into an existing model, but to follow the lead of the child and then create your program alongside that, instead of having a program already and fitting in the child to that. I think that would be very, very individualized to that particular child and family. So if all practitioners focus on that, which is what I'm doing already, so it does work. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. The next question that I have for you is, what is your perspective about maternal intuition as a concept and its impact on fair division of child rearing practices?
Thank you so much for the question. This maternal instinct is something I had experienced myself while raising my own child, and I'm sure there would be all mothers who know when their child is unwell, but that does not mean it does not exist with the father. But the point is that if policies change to making parenting and thrust on both the father and the mother equally, wherein we have policies now for maternity leave, but do we have it for fathers as well? Do they get the leave? Do they have the support? So even when the mothers, especially in the chapter 4, said that they were not supported, it was not because the fathers didn't want to. So if that this intuition is possible when you are living with the person, whether it is child or anybody, when you have those experiences, when you are living with somebody 24/7, you know that is very, very valuable, and that is scope for future research as well on how this can be utilized more. This need not be just from mother to child. Even the children sense that when the mother is upset, they sense it. So though we say that with children with autism specifically that there is lack of empathy, but that is not so. The children really sense it both ways and can be supported. So if this instinctive instincts being valued as knowledge, it can be for everybody, for the entire family, and it can benefit if we are open to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go on to the following opponent, Professor Ravish. He is professor and head of the Department of Psychiatry, Mysore Medical College and Research Institute, Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Bangalore, India. Very glad that you're here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. On the authority of the rector and by the virtue of my right, dear candidate, I thank you for the elusive lived experiences, matters, knowledge, and also your presentation of expanding the defense with a valid words in the right places. Now, my question is, since it's more towards qualitative research, I should congratulate, because relatively qualitative research is quite uncommon in a huge setup like India. As a clinician, I'm more interested how you would like to translate this knowledge into more clinical effectiveness.
Thank you, learned opponent, for the very relevant question, and thank you for the compliments on the presentation and my thesis. Yes, to translate it to practice, I think it would just start with like how we started, including in the therapy practices. Like in the first phase, in the diagnostic phase, to include the mother's knowledge would be having protocols on how the diagnosis can be delivered, how can the practitioners slow down the process of delivering the diagnosis, if for some reason, and also because we don't have standardized tools for even testing, we are not aware even of the prevalence. All that we know is that there are more and more children who are now coming into the rehab system, more and more families. So if there is any difficulty with the professional to lack of a constraint of time, which is like most likely felt in a country like India, where there are so many people coming and lack of specialized resources, then all the more reason that we have a trans diagnostic team where we have a lot of people who are guiding the mother through, not necessarily on a definite diagnosis, but start with the intervention. The whole concept of we can intervene only after a diagnosis can be a mindset change with the practitioners. So if a mother is coming, before we give a diagnosis, if we can include what can the mother do with that, if they are noticing a difference from the time, because there has been, in the chapter it says it has been dismissed predominantly by pediatricians. So, and by saying that there is nothing wrong or wait. So if this practice can change, we would bridge the gap between the child getting access to intervention. Because on one side, diagnosis, yes, is a goal, because if you need to be included in the rights and get the accommodation, you need a diagnosis. But then then it becomes very important on how the diagnosis is delivered. And after the intervention starts, like in the table shown in the chapter 5, we can see that it created vulnerability almost as similar as the mother having lost the child. It was similar to the grief model, but there were professionals, effective professionals, practitioners who held her, who were collective, like all professionals, whichever field you are, came together and worked with the child. It really contributed to the agency and it worked. So including the mother in the therapy should not be seen as a barrier, because the common thing we hear is if the mothers come, the children will not cooperate. So then who else should the child cooperate to becomes the question. So probably that should even come in the training of professionals, where we are trained to train. That would change, I think, how we work as practitioners. I hope that has answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, your approach of trans-diagnostic evaluation by multidisciplinary, that's quite interesting. You said more and more children are coming for rehabilitation. So what do you have to say about the current trend, about the prevalence of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, in a hugely populous country like India?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, considering that we have a high population, we can also see it as a strength that our greatest resource is manpower. So certainly we will see the incidence as increasing. Probably we don't, it might not be a definite reason why this is increasing, but all that we know with the prevalence now, that yes, there are more children and families using the rehabilitation system. Now, why are they but it is good that they are reaching the rehabilitation system, because that is the only way we can have records, because records of prevalence comes from hospital records. So if we want them to reach the system soon, maybe we should start working before they reach the system, because the record starts only upon diagnosis. Maybe we are losing them out before that. So I think if the work from 0 to 3 years, where the exchange of knowledge happens there, we either they reach the system early, and the focus need not be as much on prevalence, but more on support. On one side, when there are studies happening on what is the cause and what is the cure, we can't stop this. So when that happens, this needs to happen side by side, where there is support happening from the time of childbirth in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of skill transfer on basic child development skills, basic parenting skills, and yes, with the pandemic, on how to use technology. And or if that happens, prevalence wouldn't be an issue. Our system would be ready to support no matter what, like how we handled COVID. We had to, so we increased the support and we spread the knowledge, and we were able to cope. Especially, I'm speaking specifically in Kerala, we saw that. And so I think if we can not worry much about prevalence and work on support, maybe it is the way forward. Thank you.
Okay, so you feel there is a trend of increased service users, and we are gearing up for providing their needs. Okay. Well, if that's the secondary and the tertiary preventive aspects, now I would like to ask you, what would be the primary prevention, like the mothers preventing someone, okay, having a ASD child, okay? What do you think? I mean, your work, how can it throw light or help in primary prevention?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. When we talk about prevention, it should precede with promotion of active knowledge about basic child development skills because even if you're talking about a child with autism, what are the skills affected? These are skills milestones, child development milestones, which has enough evidence. So if this knowledge can be transferred to all the mothers, including from before childbirth onwards, guide them through that whole process, especially the first 1 year. Knowledge, what was seen in the first study in chapter 4 was specific knowledge about social and emotional learning and how to bond with the child and how to identify if there is a delay, and including the family members. If all this can start in as a promotional activity, and also for the government to include pamphlets, like how there is so much of knowledge sharing happening for there is a thrust on, like we say, with washing hands and wearing the mask, and people have learned. Every population has learned within a span of probably a month or two. So similarly, if there is active knowledge sharing happening as a promotional tool, we will lead to I think we would lead to more prevention as well. So prevention, I hope that answers the question.
I mean, you are focused more about following the birth of the child. Well, what about prenatal or antenatal? What about focusing on the mothers themselves? What do you have to say about that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yes, certainly, because we really need active, because at the moment, anybody can become a mother. We are not asking for any set qualification or even a license to be responsible for an entire life. So that it is from there, maybe we should start with probably counseling even before a couple decides to have a child or adopt a child or become the primary caregiver for a child. They really need to know what the journey entails. and what are the responsibilities that they need to face for. So yes, that would include prenatal care. What do they have enough knowledge about what kind of birthing experiences they can choose? Do they have, so this kind of knowledge sharing certainly, like you said, will certainly help, even from, and what kind of emotional support the mother needs about postpartum depression, which the family and particularly the husband needs to know and the family members needs to know. So yes, a lot of knowledge sharing on this, and making it a supportive and a pleasant experience, antenatal, that would be giving her more choices and helping her make an informed choice of what she wants as a way forward. That would be, I think, hopefully.
That's good enough. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. Then we go to the last opponent of this afternoon. And the last opponent is Dr. Zweekhorst. She is Professor, Innovation and Education in the Health and Life Sciences, Athena Institute, this university. I'm very glad that you're here. Floor is yours.
On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my rights, dear candidates, I would like to make congratulations to you and your supervisors on this beautiful book with a beautiful cover, I have to say. And I think what you really see in this book, that you really write it from the heart. I think that's the difference with most PhD students, which is only a scientific endeavor. I think next to a scientific endeavor, this is really a personal endeavor for you. And that's what you read in the book. So compliments to that. And I think you really started this book from your own experiences, and I'm really urged to contribute to the situation you're faced yourself. So wonderful book. I read it with much pleasure. But of course, it also raises some interesting challenges, discussions, and we already have seen that in my previous colleagues. I would like to elaborate a little on the question which already was started with Professor Henderson about, in your book, you really focus on the mothers, but you indicate, especially now in your defense, the role of the wider family, the role of the father, the grandmothers, grandparents, how they also could play a role. And my question to you would be, because you say now it's basically in India, the mother who takes the care, and is this really an Indian thing? What's the role of culture in this problem?
Dear opponent, thank you very much for the compliments, specifically on the cover. And since you mentioned it, I would also mention that it was designed, the artwork was by an artist who specifically draws about honoring the mother, child, and the family, and hence the choice. And the design was by a very dear colleague and friend who has worked extensively in the field of mental health. So, and hence the cover. Thank you. And they are watching. About the question of how we can include the knowledge of the fathers and grandmothers and what added, how can we use that? Is that the question? If I am.
She was basically, is this typical for India? Well, what's the role of culture? Is this a culture thing that the mothers have to take care of the children in general, maybe, or that the mothers have to take care of children which have a mental disability?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Yes, certainly the culture plays a role because India, yes, we are a patriarchal society, and yes, it is the mother who is considered as the primary caregiver, as what is said in literature as well. And particularly in India, if we look at how the media also used to thrust on the mother, and motherhood is being most often portrayed as something that completes the woman. This thrust is already there through literature, through media, and through everywhere, where the mother's role is so, I would use the word glorified, that when a mother actually decides not to become a mother, that itself creates vulnerability. She, from a woman not even getting a choice on whether she wants to become a mother, or if she wants to become what type of birthing or adoption, is rarely part of her own choice of what she can do with her own body. And yes, this has a cultural implication, and certainly in India. But after, and it is also almost a thrust from the family that you have your education, you are of a certain legal marriageable age, and you have to get married, and then it is like from one after the other. After marriage, it is immediately on, when are you having the baby, and if you have one, when are you having the second one? So this is almost like an unsaid, unwritten norm, which is culturally specific, and certainly India, including Kerala, despite Kerala being high on education literacy. But yes, the trends are slowly changing, very slowly, but that it is changing. So yes, considering that it is cultural, all the more reason that yes, we include the men, who are the biggest support system, to understand what is happening, why is it important to give the women the choices, and how can they play a supportive role would be very, very crucial, and how the families can play the role of the support system and not necessarily take the informed decision. The decision needs to rest with the woman who is deciding whether to become a mother or not. So, and of course the father as well, where because it is a combined responsibility. And of course, if you are being a single parent or adopting as a single mother, yes, then it should be her choice. And otherwise, the next other person should be the father, and everybody else has to become secondary. I hope that is.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's interesting to hear. And I have a question, because on the page 150 of your book, you have this nice diagram. And you explain the mother, how you put her in the meso system. And next you have this ecosystem, in which you said it's a teacher, support staff, peer group, and other parents. So I was wondering, where would you now place, you indicate the important role of this family and support system. Where would you place that? Shouldn't that be a next circle somewhere in the middle between the meso and the exosystem, which you put here in the book? Because I missed them a little bit in the figure.
Yeah. I think, yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for asking me to clarify that. Yes, in the figure, in the microsystem, which is seen as the mother and child is seen as a combined unit, though in the main model, the mother is actually coming in the meso system alongside other family members. But yes, the adaptation was that the mother is put here together. And the role of in the exosystem, here in this particular chapter, which is specifically about schooling phase, when we did the semi-structured interviews, though the focus was based on knowledge of family and professionals, what came out in the interviews was more about the professionals and the schooling system, and less about the family. Because by then the mothers seem to have used enough agency to navigate it on her own, alone, without whatever support that existed in the family. So the highlight was more on, so hence we reframed it to suit the RPW, which is the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. So we chose a different approach over here within the framework of the ecological model, where we use the 10 key points of the chapter on inclusive education or schooling, which is the third section in the RPD, which has these 10 mandates, which is by law. So when we were coding, and with peer coders, we figured that this is what stood out, and the role of family members did not come out as a strong theme while we were coding the interviews in this phase. Hence, we changed it, and they were not included here. And specifically, the exosystem was the in-depth went into understanding the exosystem and the macro system, with specific reference to the 10 items in the RPD, and hence the diagram misses the family and.
I understand. I think it also shows what your previous point, the role of culture. I think this is also showing again the role that it is in culture, the mother who takes care of the children, and that's what you probably get out here as well. Thank you. Another question, you say it's already important, especially the father, and I think on page 176 you indicate you have to educate and empower parents. I think that's an interesting one. So my question is, first of all, who should be responsible for educating the parents? And next, how can we do that, educating the parents in order to reach emancipation?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, the onus will be certainly on the practitioners, but if the practitioners need to do this, one, it has to come in policy that this is part of the larger goal of rehabilitation. If we want to see improvement in the microsystem with the child, we now know that it is very much part of the family unit. So the onus will have to be first on removing the vulnerability, which is knowledge sharing, and certainly it will be the collective effort of practitioners in all diverse fields. It is not one practitioner above the other, but but since that is the gap that we saw in the research, which we need to bridge in policy also, where the goal of rehabilitation is improving the quality of life of the family and not really entirely fixing the problem in the child. It is how can we respect the diversity and how can we push forward as practitioners that we also benefit in the process. So it will be a collective ownership of all the practitioners and the society at large.
And do you think the practitioners are already well educated? Do they all believe in it that both should be important, or should we also educate them?
Yes, thank you very much for the most pertinent question, and the biggest gap also we saw that yes, the education, the system that educates the practitioners to educate the mother is again what we need to fill the gap in. So what goes into the syllabus? Like for example, in India, we have a specialized course for autism, which is necessary, and it is predominantly started by a parent group, because thus again highlights how it is lived experience matter, and they have become professionals. So yes, we need to learn from each other. So once the professionals give the basic knowledge of evidence-based practices and include the knowledge of the mothers, then it is co-creation of knowledge, and we have a new set of knowledge, and then we are team, and then we are stronger together. So then it is not like educators only, it is not knowledge from here top down, but it is together. And then I think we should bridge the gap on practitioners not having the knowledge. As if they include the knowledge of the mothers, they are more knowledgeable themselves. That is how I think practitioners can go forward.
I hope practitioners will start doing that. That would be a good one, I think. I have another question. In your chapter 5, you interviewed 15, and I think also another chapter, 15 Indian women. And it seems that they all have quite a bit of education. And my question would be, if you look at poorer people, less educated people, would they face even more constraints with having a child with autism? And what kind of additional constraints would they have?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I agree that all my participants were either graduates and majority were postgraduates, and yet this was the extent of vulnerability we saw in terms of all the three factors that increase vulnerability: was knowledge, skills, and support. So, but when we are looking, and also they were financially secure, and all of them were married too, which means there was an earning member and they could have the choice of being at home or managing career side by side. But as you said, when we look at those sections of women who do not have the privilege of making this choice, the vulnerability in terms of support is certainly going to reduce. Vulnerability, which in terms of skill can reduce, the knowledge also can reduce. So we will only assume, or it is expected, that the vulnerabilities are going to be larger, but then certainly there would need to be a scaling up of this research and more research specifically in in rural areas where sometimes maybe there is no access to even professional services which can educate the mother, or this knowledge sharing can happen. So yes, that would be something I would say for future research and to be considered, because certainly the vulnerabilities is expected to be larger in the other group.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we have now talked about autism, but there are a lot of disabilities next to that, not only mental disabilities. Do you think that if we look at the position of women in with children with other disabilities, would they face similar problems, or what are the differences?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. Yes, it would be different in several ways and similar in several ways. I would say the difference would be predominant in the first phase of their life, considering that autism is an invisible disability. Because and also to get a diagnosis, there is a lot of dismissal of instinctive knowledge when compared to other disabilities, which can be probably identified at birth, or it is more visible. So the journey of mothers of children with autism will certainly be a standout in the first phase of their journey until they get the diagnosis. But once they have the diagnosis, the stigma of disability, whether mental health or physical health, can be similar. But I would say...
Hora est.
Yes. It's you to talk.
Now that my defense has ended, I sincerely thank the opponents for the attention they have devoted to my thesis. I look forward to the decision of the doctoral examination committee in the Faculty of Science, which will decide whether the degree of Doctor of Philosophy will be granted to me.
Thank you. For that reason, this public meeting of the doctoral examination committee of the Faculty of Science will be adjourned for further deliberations. Right. Okay, gallery. So, that's better. Right, here we are. I continue this Ph.D. ceremony. By its duly accorded authority, the Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Science grants the title of doctor to Seema Girija Lal. Professor Bunders, who has been appointed by the College of Deans as supervisor, will perform the investiture. The certificate will be sent to you later and will be signed by the supervisors and the co-supervisors. So may I now request colleague Bunders to resume this ceremony.
Thank you, Rector. By the virtue of the authority vested in me by the statute of the Vrije Universiteit and a supervisor appointed thereto by the College of Deans, I hereby confer on you, Seema Girija Lal, the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, together with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto appertaining. In witness thereof, the seal of the university and signatures of the rector and the supervisors have been affixed to the diploma you are about to receive. Dr. Seema Girija Lal, dear Seema, you have defended your thesis excellent. We are all very, very happy with what you did. And all members of the doctoral committee, they all felt that you deserve unanimously the degree of doctor. Congratulations. It's really wonderful. It is a long journey, or long, you did it quick, but it feels like a long time. And you have done amazingly well, not only your thesis, but also your presentation. And this is also felt by your two supervisors, co-supervisors, Dr. Vandana Gopi Kumar and Dr. Elena Surina, And they were very, very critical in all the phases of the research. So we are all together with the members of the committee and all your supervisors very happy with how you did this huge task and work. And Seema, seldom I've seen a person so committed as you are. And when I'm thinking about you, then what comes in my mind is the word of respect. Respect for the eagerness of learning in you, and respect also for how you relate and continuously are thinking on policy change. And I'd like to elaborate a bit on both. During the last 2 years of your finishing your PhD, we spoke many evenings during the week. And it was often or always, I can perhaps say, after 9 o'clock your time, because you had your coaching work. And then we spoke for perhaps an hour about analysis, about improving articles. But these discussions always ended in one specific way. And then you said, yes, I see. What I will do is I will work now a few hours in the night and also tomorrow. And tomorrow, by the end of the day, I will send you a new version. And I think you did it. And there are almost in these 2 years, no days, perhaps you can count on one hand or two hands, that you did not work on your PhD. You always kept your promise and you always had a new version. Not that I needed to read it always, but all the time, but at least you made sure that you made every day your progress. And what a commitment. And that's not the only thing you are doing, like most of our PhD students. You also have to take care of 2 lovely boys. When I visited your house in Kerala, I had the pleasure of meeting them, and I saw how they also asked for your attention. And you were also homeschooling them. So that is another task. And apart from your coaching work, you also worked for Together We Can and put a lot of energy in that one. So that you on top of this finished your PhD is amazing, and it shows your enormous commitment. And I wonder only for one thing all the time, how do you stay healthy? Because with all these nights on working and working, but you obviously managed. And it must have been perhaps the drive with which you are doing this. And the drive is really the policy change. I remember the first discussion we had together, and you said, I would like to have the title of doctor. And I said, why? And you said, because then they will take me serious. Because then I am like them, like the other doctors. And I said, yes, I understand. And then we had a long discussion. And at the end of the discussion, you said, yes, not only the title of doctor, it's not about status. I think the academic reasoning, the in-depth understanding of policy processes, of theoretical frameworks, it will sharpen my vision, it will sharpen my analysis, and it will solidify and substantiate our work, policy work. That was already in the first discussion we had. So I think that policy work is really your drive. You can also say, if you read your book, that it is about vulnerability of children with autism and mothers, or on empowerment. But if you look at the structure of the book and the way you like to analyze your data, you see, yes, it is about them. But behind it, and you spoke a lot about it today, is there the policy process. You were interested in what are the underlying fundamental processes which we need to fully understand in depth in order to help policy change making. And that was what you have been doing all the time. And if you look at chapter 3 and 4 and 5, and I don't need to repeat it because you explained beautifully, it was directly ready for the ministries, for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, for the Ministry of Education, for the Ministry of Social Justice. So this policy change, this is really what is your big thing and which was driving you and in which you are so successful. Because I think it's almost a sort of cool to have now a case for the Supreme Court, which is called Girija versus the Union of India. And then that based also on your research, which of course is often quoted in the way it has been filed. And now it has been formally registered and it is under review. So I think it's amazing. It's amazing success. And therefore, we from our supervisors together, we all three feel that not only your research is academically sound, very sound, but socially extremely relevant. Already now you have gone so far in explaining all these discrimination as we have heard this afternoon. Yes, so we couldn't all be more happy that you did such an excellent and skillful job to really convince everybody with their difficult questions and went in depth. And even like Professor Swekor said, you could have gone on and educate us more. So that was my laudatio, but before we finish, I would like to thank the committee because you have assessed, all of you have assessed the thesis and you have been here and participated in this defense. And we would like to thank you very much for it. It is very important and so much appreciated. Thank you all very much. And finally, I like to congratulate your family and others. First, of course, your husband, Sunu, who is getting such a lovely phrase. I think every husband now wants also to have a wife who is writing her thesis and gets the compliment of unconditional love, which man is not want to hear that from you. But also your two sons and your mother, you also wrote about elaborately. And all your colleagues and friends. And I can say, and we all can say from the members of the committee and from the supervisors, you can be very, very proud because Seema did an excellent job. Thank you, Rector.
Thank you. To the congratulations of your supervisor, I gladly add the congratulations of the Council of Deans of this university. Well, this doctoral examination ceremony is now completed. Finally, I will pronounce doxology. I close this public session of the Doctoral Examination Committee. The name of the Lord shall be praised now and forevermore.